Right, it's time now for us to take a look at what's been happening in the East Africa region. And to help us unpack some of the key events and stories making headlines there is as a journalist from East Africa, Kenya in particular, team leader at Grassroot Journalism Kenya, Dennis Beru. Hello, Dennis. How are you doing, my brother?
Good morning, Peter Ndoro. I'm fine. Hope you are well.
No, I'm always good. Thanks so much indeed. There's so much to look at, but I do want to start with the biggest story, I think, for Kenya, and this is the continuing mourning of Raila Odinga. And I believe that there was a special funeral ceremony that took place.
Yes, Peter Ndoro. Of course, Kenya is still mourning the death of uh, uh, their icon, of course, Raila Odinga, who is regarded as the modern day Nelson Mandela, who died at the age of 80 in India. And of course, Kenyans and people across Africa and across the world bid the last farewell to the opposition leader Raila Odinga after several days of mourning, where we saw several people and as mourners killed. And of course, they gathered their last respect in the capital of Nairobi. Of course, Odinga, who is a pro-democracy champion, who also served as the prime minister from 2008 to 2013, was buried on Sunday at his family homestead in Siaya County, that's the western part of Kenya. Of course, the service, which was spearheaded by the Anglican Church, of course, um, it is a ceremony that, saw different leaders across Africa attend and eulogize the man they regarded as the champion of democracy. And of course, uh, after or before his death, Raila Odinga also served as the chairperson of the infrastructure development in Africa. And of course, his death has left a very big, a void in the Kenyan political space. Of course, there's a lot of speculation what will happen next after the death of Raila Odinga. Of course, before his death, Raila Odinga was in collaboration with President William Ruto under the broad-based government. So there are a lot of questions what happened next after he died.
It's interesting that him and Raila Odinga and President Ruto were not always on the same page. In fact, in the last election, there were sworn enemies, and I just wonder. It's sad that he gets the highest honor after his death. He could have got it, and he could have given it to him long before, I guess.
Of course, these are the questions that most people have been asking about. Even the highest honor in the Kenyan soil. Um, the way you said, of course, politically, there have been, enemies. But of course, Raila Odinga has really played a very crucial role in the freedom of expression that we are enjoying at the moment. I think this is the reason why his battle has been regarded as one of the most highly sort of, a battle in the Kenyan history. Even the founding father, the first president, Jomo Kenyatta, was not even accorded the battle that we all saw. And of course, being given the highest order in Kenya, of course, it is just a sign of a respect and the role he has played in our governance system, especially during the multi-party democracy. We saw what happened in early 90s. And before that, he was arrested and jailed for now for about 6 up to 9 years. And when he was released, we saw the changes, and that's
Right.
Kenya started enjoying multi-party democracy. Of course, Peter Ndoro, um, uh, the question you're asking, being politically enemies, and then now being accorded the highest honor in Kenya. Of course, it is a sign of respect. And after all, he has gone, so Kenya has to move.
Right.
But let's honor our departed son.
Okay. All right. Let's go to Tanzania now, where a high court there dismissed a petition from Alliance for Change and Transparency. Actor Wazalendo, presidential hopeful, Luhaga Mpina, to overturn his disqualification as a candidate in the upcoming general elections by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. I guess it carries on this theme of Tanzania's ruling party making sure that there are no threats to President Suluhu Hassan's continuance.
Of course, Peter Doro, we have words, this is death to democracy in Tanzania. Of course, Mpina and Actors Alendo's Board of Trustees, of course, they had lodged, the petition last month asking the court to nullify the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, decision and reinstate him as the party's presidential candidate. Of course, following the preliminary objection raised by the Attorney General and the INEC, of course, a three-judge bench led by Justice Frederica Manyanda ruled that the High Court lacked jurisdiction to review or overturn the decision made by the electoral body. The ruling effectively ended Mpina's presidential ambition with just 2 weeks remaining before the vote. So Peter Ndoro, of course, this now shows that the ruling party, Chama of course, Mapinduzi, led by the presidential candidate now, the incumbent, Samia Suluhu Hassan, of course, they will enjoy, this because the actor land, of course, this was the only hope for the Tanzanian opposition wing to challenge President Samia Suluhu in the coming election. Of course, Actor Zalendo will now join other 18 political parties participating in the election, but they will primarily focus on parliamentary and the councillor seat. Of course, they will have to go into the election without the presidential candidate. Of course, it is a very sad, note to note this in Tanzania, but a lot needs to be done because barring or denying someone an opportunity to participate in an election, of course, it is sad. But let's see what happens. But of course, we might see Mama Samia Suluhu winning by landslide.
Yeah, and that's most likely the result that we're going to see for sure. Talking about elections, things are changing in Somalia, aren't they? We take it for granted, but this hasn't always been the case. But a date has been set for a one-person, one-vote election for the first time.
Of course, Peter Ndoro, this has never happened, and it is happening in 56 years now. Of course, these are region called Banadir region, where it is set to hold the first one-person, one-vote local council election on 30th November. Of course, the announcement was made by the National Electoral and Boundaries Commission, Chairperson Abdulkadir Ahmed Hassan. Of course, voter registration in Badir just concluded on 30th September, and nearly 1 million people or Somalis have registered in the region, which has an estimated population of about 4 million people. The election date had already been postponed once. Of course, it was supposed to be held from 30th October now it will be held on 30th November due to the submission of party symbols and other legal compliance, of course, the requirement by the political organization. Of course, this is now the future of Somalia. Of course, we have seen key opposition grouping, the National Salvation Forum, among others, and a newly formed alliance that is the Somali Future Council, calling the process illegal or insufficient, inclusive, saying it lacks, broad consensus and raises question about the legitimacy. Of course, there are now accusing government under Sheikh Mohamud of drafting electoral laws and laterally appointing friendly commission members. Of course, successful Peter Ndoro, of course, in Benadir region, of course, could mark a milestone in Somalia's democratic process. Of course, this is a step towards more inclusive election, moving away from the clan-based indirect selection, and now going towards people electing the leaders of their choice.
A fascinating development in Uganda, set to host the Game Conference 2025 at the end of this month, billed as Africa's largest AI gathering. What does it tell us about the growing role of digital transformation and opportunities and things like AI in East Africa?
Of course, the Game Conference 2025 will be held from October 30th to 31st, and is expected to draw over 5,000 delegates from across 180 countries. Of course, the event is the Africa's largest and the most influential AI conference of the year. Of course, we shall be spotlighting the continent's growth role in shaping the digital economy, and of course, positioned as far more than a traditional summit. Of course, the Game Conference is piled as a global movement, a platform where innovators, policymakers, investors, and researchers converge to define the future of the AI and digital transformation across Africa. Of course, this is being held first in Africa, of course, Uganda, and of course, the two-day immense program, of course, they'll be looking at, the AI and the global economy, where they'll be unlocking the productivity and the inclusive growth, of course, innovation in the key sectors, which is now finance, health, agriculture, and education. Of course, the possible AI and data ethic, that is now the governance framework, and the equitable AI deployment, and of course, the building Africa's AI center ecosystem. Of course, we all know that these will be built in Uganda. Of course, we shall be looking at the skill development and academic collaboration. Of course, policy and regulation enabling sustainable digital transformation across the continent. Of course, the game will offer unrivaled, networking opportunities, linking startups, and of course, with investors, innovators, with policymakers, researchers, with industry leaders. Of course, Peter Ndoro, these are good things for Africa. Of course, we are in the digital space, in the AI era, and of course, now having this conference in Uganda, of course, as African, this is something we should be proud of. And of course, for the participant, of course, I hope this is going to be an opportunity for them to explore more on how to adopt AI in our businesses and our daily lives.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it, my brother. Asante sana. We'll chat again next week. In the meantime, take care.
Asante sana, karibu sana, Peter Ndoro.
That's Dennis Beru, our regular commentator on East African affairs, talking to us there from Nairobi. And he's team leader at Grassroot Journalism Kenya, which takes us to our news headlines as we say good morning once again to Onele Nsinsi.